the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board
This
Land Use and
conference will
Servicing
now
Committee.
be recorded.
You will note from that the meeting is being recorded. We are live streaming on YouTube, and we'll use that as evidence of this meeting having been conducted in public. If for some reason our live streaming fails, which it has occasionally in the past, although we've had a pretty good run lately, touch wood, we will endeavor to get the live stream back on. If we can't, we will use the recording posted to the CMRB website as evidence of this meeting having been held in public. I will officially call the meeting to order, hand it over to Mayor Craig Snodgrass from High River to provide us with a land acknowledgement. Mayor Snodgrass, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Clark. The Calgary Metropolitan Region is honored to be in the traditional territory of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney nations of the Stoney Nakoda, and the home of Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, the CMRB is actively working to build meaningful and mutual beneficial long-term relationships with Indigenous nations and communities in and around the region. The Calgary Metropolitan Region is situated on land to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, and play on this land and who honor and celebrate this territory.
Mayor, thank you very much. Appreciate that. The agenda was distributed to you all a week ago. Anyone have any questions, comments, edits, amendments, or proposed changes to the agenda? And if not, may I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? That's Deputy Reeve Waldorf, thank you. And Deputy Reeve Koken, thank you. Any debate and discussion on the adoption of the agenda? Seeing, hearing none, by exception, anyone wishing to vote opposed to adoption of the agenda? Seeing, hearing none, that carries. Same question for the minutes for our last meeting, March 14th, 2024. Any edits, amendments, comments, questions, or changes to the minutes from the previous meeting? And if none, I will invite a motion, please, to approve the minutes. Deputy Mayor Robinson, thank you. Councillor Petro, thank you. Any debate and discussion on that? And by exception, anyone wishing to vote opposed, please let me know. Seeing, hearing none, that carries. Okay, Councillor Carra, I know you don't have any audio. Excuse me. Hopefully you can hear us. I see that your microphone is grayed out. If need be, you can look at the meeting notice and phone in for audio on your phone. But if that becomes a challenge, either text me or let us know, and hopefully you can hear us. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie Graves and Lisa Tippman for discussion on and an update on the Regional Transportation and Transit Master Plan document. We're getting there on this one. Finally, it's been a long journey with a lot of hard work along the way. So. Jamie, looks like you've got your microphone on, so I think you're going to go kick us off. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Clark, and good morning to the committee. Yes, today we have the Regional Transportation and Transit Master Plan scope before you, the committee, for recommendation to the board. And before we really get into any notes about the scope, I wanted to just extend our gratitude to the support and engagement of municipal and Alberta Transportation and Economic Corridor staff, many from the side of their desks, but a lot of work went into this, and we want to acknowledge that that takes time and energy and effort, and we're grateful for the strengthening of this work through their input. And as you noted, the work is a result of a thorough process that we undertook that began in 2022. This report is the final deliverable for the scoping project. It involved a best practice review of regional transportation and transit master planning at regional scales across Canada with subject matter experts, and that was a presentation you saw in March of last year. We also held a workshop in May of last year with administrations and elected officials and other experts, as well as subject matter experts, to develop and refine the objective statements for the first RTTMP in the CMR, and RTTMP was also noted as a key recommendation in the growth plan that brings benefit to regions in terms of regional planning. And in June of 2023, Last year, the board approved foundational objectives of the RTTMP scope, and those included to develop a regionally significant multimodal transportation network, to pursue efficiency in the planning and delivery of the regional transportation network, to ensure the transportation network supports regional competitiveness, and to build a sustainable and affordable network. Together with the Transit and Transportation Technical Advisory Group and input from Land Use and Servicing Committee, this year and last year, we developed this document with enough detail to allow for qualified consultants to provide their expert approaches and for them to respond in a competitive procurement process, which would be next steps if this were to be approved by the board. So the project involves two parts. Part one, focusing on identifying the system and the regional transportation and transit system using maps and common terms and definitions, being also engagement with external stakeholders and those that have a role to play in improving the system, and identifying strategies that regions use to achieve results in alignment with those board objectives that were approved. And then through that, checking those conceptual strategies against our particular system, and then offering actions and policy to improve the system and how those actions will be monitored and reported over time. And the second part, we're developing a repeatable process through an agreed upon evaluation framework and criteria to create multimodal infrastructure priority list or lists that focus on funding projects in sort of the short term, and that list would action a portion of that longer term vision and the visionary regional transportation plan in the part one by identifying the highest priority projects needed to optimize and improve the network. And those selection criteria would be used to score individual projects and establish project priorities and make sure that those align with the values of the CMRB and the needs of potential funding partners. So the goal would be to have key elements of the RTTMP inform the coming growth and servicing plan updates in 2027 to the extent possible. But you may have seen that the timeline shown in the back of the document anticipates that, and so we're planning accordingly. Again, that last page of the scope anticipates the timeline, which would take the project out to the end of 2027. And considers the availability of key dependencies needed for the scope, such as population and employment projections, a regional transportation model, context study inputs, and others. Presently, the board has budgeted in our forecasts around $845,000 through the end of 2027. But in terms of other sources of funding, we're continuing to work with tech and others on partnering to fund the project, but we don't have additional details on those pieces to share at this time. The next steps for the project following, if the scope was to be approved, was that RFP procurement process. And once the scope is approved by the board, we would, CMRB administration would develop a request for proposal documents and post that request for proposals to Alberta Purchasing Connection, an open bidding process to obtain proposals from qualified consultants. And then we would review those proposals once we receive them and share rationale of a preferred proponent with transportation and transit tag for discussion. We'd return to the board with a charter and a recommendation on the preferred proponent, including adjustments that might be needed to the budget or schedule. And then once approved by the board, CMRB administration would enter into contract negotiations with a preferred proponent. And so with that as sort of an introduction to the scope, Lisa, would you like to add or elaborate on any of the things I mentioned earlier?
I don't have anything to add. Thanks, Jamie. I thought that was a great overview. Thanks.
With that, Mr. Chair, I think Lisa and I are happy to answer questions from committee if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much. Efficient as always. Thank you. It looks like we've got Councillor Carraw back. GC, can we just do a really quick mic check? It looks like you're on, but I just want to triple confirm.
Can you guys hear me?
You sure can. Perfect.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Just, one thing I meant to note at the very beginning, although we do have a few things to vote on here today, not tons and tons. When we get to voting, I'm going to ask that we use the chat or an actual physical hand up or the chat to acknowledge one way or the other. Using the response reaction is a little confusing because there's a bit of a lag. So it's not always clear if there's a yes or a no and how that necessarily counts. So I just did want to make that quick note. That was something I meant to mention at the beginning. So we're good. And we've got an RTS in the chat. So we'll go with Councillor Carra and we'll take it from there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy with this proposed plan, and I'm happy to move it if someone else doesn't want to have the honor of doing that. I will stand down and just, I guess I think that vehicle kilometers traveled and infrastructure costs are two great meta metrics that will sort of track a lot of things. I guess my two questions are, we are in a housing crisis. We are also in a climate crisis, and it's a TOD-oriented plan. How do you see us shaping the RFP so that housing is something that a consultant is thinking about all the time? You know, housing and jobs and sort of connectivity in that regard.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Carra. In terms of housing, our growth plan is really all about, as you know, preferred place types. It's about mixed use. It's about variety of housing types. And so I would say that just the fact that we're leaning into our growth plan, it is in alignment with that. There are pieces of the housing needs assessment might be another piece that we might include as some of the background information. And to speak to your comment about economic development, our goods movement and regional competitiveness objectives will bring forth that expertise from, it's like sort of locked into our current objectives. And so I'm anticipating that will signal to our potential proponents that those are part of our key values, and anticipate them responding accordingly.
Okay. That's a decent answer. I'm comfortable with it. My other question is, phase 2, we talk about that's when we sort of put pen to paper and we're speaking about modeling. What's the relationship between modeling and just actual sort of just like design decisions, where because you can cut anything a million different ways, and at a certain point you got to just sort of put pen to paper and start making decisions. How do we see us striking the balance between sort of like modeling and sort of like normative design decision making?
When you say normative design, do you mean like the sort of policy direction type guidance that would be included, or are you speaking specifically to like interchange or like for something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at a certain point we're going to have to say, if we have a regional plan that's based on the introduction of regional transit, there's got to be a certain amount of decision making and commitment to what that looks like or how that's going to work, right? I mean, I think so. I mean, at what point do we just like start drawing lines on the map and say this point's going to be connected to this point and this point's going to be connected to this point, and those points are going to become important places in the land use and servicing plan and in the JPA, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. The part 1 includes identifying, including drawing those maps, and really we have done quite a bit of this work in some of our background reports, transit, and to some extent, some of the regional transportation projects that we did in the past. But it's true, with these things have to come together, and with population and employment projections coming online later in 2025, and also those context studies and just sort of identifying what are employment nodes and like you say, connecting those locations, people connecting to jobs and important services, etc. So that's intended in the part 1. But in terms of scoring projects, that's in part 2, where we identify how particular infrastructure, including transit projects, and their outcomes can be measured with that data-driven process. And so there'll be quantitative and qualitative criteria anticipated in the evaluation framework. And so that's sort of how we bring those two things together.
Okay, that's a good answer too. Okay. I understand now what the phase 2 modeling is about. It's about evaluating the decisions of phase 1. I guess my final question, and I thought I only had 2, but how do we see the relationship between this work and the JPAs? Because I'm heavily involved in 2 of the JPAs, and we are sort of getting past the point where we're sort of doing the gap analysis, and at some point we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. And what's the relationship between the work at the JPAs and this work, and who takes lead and who follows? And
yeah, thanks for that. We have, and the growth plan had directed that the participants of those JPAs be the ones to look at it together, make decisions, kind of give some guidance. And we are anticipating that that information will come to us in the form of, land uses and identifying employment areas and what portion of the JPA is for what type of uses. And so we're anticipating receiving those inputs and using them in the modeling portion, and also just the discussing mapping and that sort of area of the project. So we are taking lead from the joint planning areas and direction from them to the extent that they're addressing these transportation and transit related items.
Okay. That's an important distinction, and I'm comfortable with the JPAs that are a little bit more on the ground, sort of making some decisions. I will just note as just a meta point of debate that there's a balance to be struck in projects like this between not making decisions that prevent the future from being flexible enough to take advantage of things. But then there's also a problem with being too flexible and having, a train to nowhere or something like that. And I can tell you that with projects like the Green Line, a failure to really get down and lock things in really hurt the long-term fundability of that project and getting it over the hump. And so I think that we have to strike a balance between flexibility, but also boldness and decision making, so that we actually have something that can be funded. And I'm looking forward to having those discussions in the future. Happy to move it unless someone else would like to.
Thanks, Councillor Carral. Why don't we do a bit of a first round of discussion, and we can we'll get to the motion after, if that is agreeable. Sounds good. Okay, we've got Councillor Petro up, Deputy Mayor Robinson, Deputy Reeve Koken, in that order. So Councillor Petro, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So through the chair, just to GC's last there, I love flexibility with strong criteria. I think it builds a great system. But so Airdrie is very comfortable with where we've landed on this. I think this project has evolved quite nicely, and we're comfortable with where it's at now. I just had a couple questions. So the first one was just about resources for this RFP. So what are the requested resources of municipalities to support the RFP evaluation and delivery of the scope?
Thanks for that. The resources that would be requested for the procurement process is really to hear our recommendations, and we'll distribute information where possible and sort of summarize our evaluations of the proposals once we receive them. And so to the extent that member municipalities want to do a deep dive in reviewing, that is sort of, we'll make that information available. But really, it would just be maybe 2 to 3 sort of tag meetings to have a discussion about the responses and hear our rationale for what we're proposing, and then see how those items resonate with our member municipalities and have the discussions.
Okay, thanks. And then the RFP, will it include the project budget, like the upset limit for it in the RFP?
No.
No? Okay. So then my next 2 questions really are a little more specific. So Appendix B in the timelines, it had a line that said other inputs, and we're specifically wondering about the population and employment projections. So is the RTTMP project dependent on these projections? And if so, who's responsible to prepare the projections, the CMR or the member municipalities?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the population and employment projections are anticipated to be an input, and Lisa is working through land use tag right now to sort of kick off some of that work. So we are anticipating that the region will be preparing those, and this time those things will be working in one particular project in an integrated way. Lisa, do you want to speak to any more of that?
Thanks. Yeah, the population and employment projections, I mean, they do need to be updated, I think, to really get the most out of the modeling process that's going to be completed for the RTTMP. We are going to start doing a scoping process very similar to this one right away starting next week. And we'll have a consultant online hopefully soon to get those started. The relationship between the municipal and regional projections is such that municipalities will still, if they want to, for their own planning purposes, will have their own projections. And the regional ones more help us look at kind of the regional picture of growth, because municipalities make different projections for different reasons. And what we found when we did this previously was if you added them all up, we were going to be 5 million people right away. And so what we found is it's best to do a regional control total sort of, and then break it up amongst the member municipalities appropriately as per historic growth and also anticipated growth. So that's kind of the relationship between them. So it's not a deal breaker. It won't stop the RTTMP, but we do think it's an important input, and we are getting those started right away.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And then my last question is just if there's any delays to this project at all, will that affect the amendments to the growth and servicing plan schedule for 2027? And if there's a delay with this, would that growth and servicing plans proceed without recommendation from the RTTMP?
I can take that one. Thanks. I think those we will try to avoid that, obviously, but there are circumstances where that may be the case. However, as you've seen, a majority of the policy-related work happens in the early part of the project, and therefore it's more likely that those pieces would be available to the update project in advance of the deadline. And so for that reason, I feel fairly confident that we shouldn't run into a major problem in that regard. Lisa, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think the majority of the inputs into the growth and servicing plan will come from part 1, which is the more visionary and policy-based document, which is going first. So there are a bunch of codependencies, and a lot of really, really major delay may not allow us to have the outputs of some of the scenario testing that we're doing in part 1. But I don't foresee we're going to be putting and requesting strong project management controls and focusing on that as part of the RFP process to ensure that we're staying on track so they can feed into each other. But it is one of the reasons why this is broken up into 2 parts, is to make sure that the part 1, where we really need it for the growth and servicing plan updates, is available.
Okay, perfect. I have the utmost faith that this will be done on time. I just always like to make sure that we know what'll happen if there's a delay, but I appreciate you breaking those down. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Great questions as always. From Okotoks, Deputy Mayor Robinson, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Like, we don't have the sort of planning tools that Calgary does for this transit and transportation stuff. So I have like some like fundamental questions about understanding some of the stuff in the report. So like the recommendation is to take a regional plan that's based off of Calgary's model, right? I've got that part of the recommendation, right? Like that's the fundamental tool that this thing is going to work with.
It's not the only tool, but yes, it is a tool that would be used.
Okay, and that model, that's that EMME, which is a piece of software that basically takes like where people are, where land use plans are in Calgary and roads and transit nodes and all that stuff, and projects like, here's how long it's going to take someone to get from X to Y and how many cars are going to travel, or people are going to be on this transit and all that kind of stuff. I got that about right about what that model is?
It does do that. It assigns trips and time, measures distances. It's a very powerful tool. It can do all kinds of metric calculations as well. And it breaks down geographic location by transportation zones. And so there are zones within the model that the city of Calgary uses that includes pieces of the regional story. So some transportation zones are located within, like outside of the city of Calgary and within the region.
Okay, and that's the regional version of that Calgary transportation model that is going to be used to form these two plans, essentially.
Yes, with
Okay.
an update to the assumptions in it.
Okay, and is that update to the assumptions, that's part of the work that's going to be in the scope? It wasn't quite clear to me that that's part of what's going to be bid on.
It is in part 2, yes.
Okay, and then in order to get to part 1, like we're going to put in some of those assumptions and it's going to spit out like, here's how long it's going to take to get from Chestermere to Calgary if we put in, you know, a bus lane or a transit line or whatever the story is. And then we're going to use that sort of in order to gauge whether or not certain types of visionary parts will meet the objectives in terms of like the vehicle kilometers traveled and the you know, people close to transit and all that kind of stuff that we've got as the objectives.
Yeah, heading back to those measures that are in the growth plan, including, like you say, vehicle kilometers traveled and cost of infrastructure.
Okay, and then in the report it talks about like the expense of each model run, essentially, right? And that's like basically every time we take an assumption and stick it in the model, there's like a cost to that. So we're kind of limited on the number of sort of proposed assumptions that we can try out before we get to like which ones actually work. Am I understanding that part right?
Yeah, we would be able to run a few conceptual scenarios. And so I want to just distinguish between assumption and a scenario. So assumption might be a very finite and location specific piece of the inputs, and the scenario being a larger, more broad sort of run of what the region looks like and how it performs if you do certain things.
Sure. Yeah. A scenario is like, okay, if we put 100,000 people in Rockview County and Airdrie additionally, like what does that look like? And an assumption is like people will drive 100 kilometers an hour down Beautiful Trail or something like that. Okay. All right. And so I guess then my question is how then, like, is the RFP proponent, like the person who's going to be providing these services, they're going to like come up with the recommendations about which scenarios to run based on the current employment and population projections? That's going to be part of their job, and to sort of scope that as to how many of those different scenarios we can run?
Not based on necessarily population and employment, but based on what a region like ours and a vision that we have, knowing what the growth plan is directing the region to do, what sort of options do we have in order to optimize and achieve those goals, not only the objectives, but also the benefits that the growth plan anticipates.
Okay, yeah, essentially like they're not going to run like a scenario where, every quarter section of land from the south end of Foothills County to the north end of Rocky View has 30 houses on it, because that's not part of our growth plan. So there's no point running a model like that. Okay.
That is correct.
All right. And then I'm just curious in terms of like the recommendation, I think, is to basically do the two parts of the plan in tandem, right? The visionary part and the specific project part. Like to basically run these runs and come up with the recommendations like in tandem, right? So we're not going to see the visionary plan before they're also working on what the sort of 10 to 15 type of projects that we're going to put on our priority list. Have I understood that part right?
Yeah, so we've tried to distinguish between conceptual scenarios where we run those ideas of, like, as an example, what would happen if we really leaned into transit in the region and increased the amount of transit that's available? What would that do, and how would that attract ridership, etc.? Whereas and that's to understand what the scenarios would look like. And then following that, we would be looking at individual projects where an improvement to a certain area of the region, what are the outcomes of that, and does it align with that vision that we have about what we found about our testing of those few scenarios? Does it align with that vision, and can we create that? Does it align with also the growth plan? I hope that's helpful. It does happen in the second portion, but that's because the model is needed for conceptual scenario runs and also for testing individual projects to score them against how they perform in relation to each other.
Yeah, well, I guess how I'm sort of envisioning this is a bit like iterative amongst like the plan. Like you're gonna like put in like base concept, I don't know, where the highway and the bus lanes and that kind of stuff go. You're gonna see what kind of comes out of it, and you're gonna be like, and this would be like the projects we need to put in to get to that run. But like that doesn't actually seem to match what we're looking for. What if we like, move whatever, a green line up the scale, or what if we move a bus lane dedicated to Chestermere up the priority list? What if we move an interchange up the priority list that's north of Calgary or south of Calgary, that type of thing, or one within Calgary? It's all regional. So, and then run that again essentially and like see, does that actually improve the outcomes? Am I kind of understanding how this is all going to shake out?
So it's a little bit different. The scenario of the conceptual scenarios talking about an increase or, outcomes that improve the performance of the region in relation to the growth plan, that portion is still separate from where we don't move projects up and down in a priority. They are improvements that would be required in order to meet what that conceptual scenario can do.
Oh, I see.
So
Like we want to get to like, sorry, we want to get to like the vehicle kilometers traveled are X, or this many people are on transit from this employment node to this employment node. And the model will tell you, well, you're going to need to build like this transit line to this many highways or interchange or that kind of thing, in order to get to that level of performance, essentially. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's all my questions. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, very good, deep questions. So that's good, really good discussion. Okay, so we've got Deputy Reeve Koken, followed by Deputy Reeve Waldorf. Go ahead, Don.
You can hear me?
You bet.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, it was suggested that the JPA committees can provide guidance on potentially identifying transit needs to the CMRB. Is there any criteria that the CMRB are suggesting we use as far as the level of detail, as far as what those needs may be?
We have left the guidance, or just ready to receive the guidance from the joint planning areas. There are some plans already in place, and so we will know some idea of land use. But if there are additional guidance that might want to be brought forward to the regional transit and transportation and transit master plan, then we would receive those. But we're not dictating to the participating municipalities what exactly needs to be addressed. However, the growth plan does make a number of recommendations about what a context study would cover.
Okay, so the JPA committees then can actually flush out some concepts as far as the transportation needs in the area, but the level of detail is whatever we can actually produce at the time.
Yes.
Very good, thank you.
$5 on the mute swear jar for me, so apologies. Okay, Deputy Reeve Waldorf, Foothills County, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think most of my questions were answered thanks to Councillor Robinson with his questions, zeroing in on based on the City of Calgary model. And really just an observation, with some 80% of our residents in Foothills County not living on the City of Calgary border, there's not that much requirement to catch a bus from Cayley into the city. And of course, coupling that with future growth. So no, appreciate the clarification on it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, that exhausts our speaking list such as we have it. Anyone else have any other questions or comments on the RTTMP? And if none, I will invite a motion that the committee recommend to the board approval of the Regional Transportation and Transit Master Plan scoping document. Do we have anyone willing to move such a motion? That's Councillor Carra, seconded by Deputy Mayor Robinson. Okay, we'll do an all in favor. If anyone can just indicate with the hand or in the RTS. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. Carries unanimously. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, well, why don't we take about a 5-minute bio break here, and then we'll come back with the second half of our agenda at 9:42. I'll give you 5.5 minutes. We'll be back then. 10:42 a.m. exactly. We'll get back going. Our next topic is something I know that everyone's very on top of and concerned about this year, that being a drought response and how we're going to respond as not just individual municipalities, but as a province and as a region. So we'll have a quick update here verbally from Jamie Graves. Jamie, back to you.
Thanks, Chair Clark. Just to update the committee, we have met with member municipalities and we continue to share local updates in preparation for potential conditions in the coming season. There's still sort of an ongoing discussion of staged actions and communications, regional messaging, etc. But the province did make a few announcements through the budget related to water, and those included four key areas: water storage, water management, water conservation, and modernizing data and the information system within the province. To the water storage piece, there has been a couple of sort of continued announcements, maybe a couple of new things as well. So the feasibility study for the Bow River Reservoir is anticipated this year. The province also plans to begin a feasibility study for Airmore Dam, which is downstream of Bassano, if you don't know, southwest of Brooks, and a new feasibility study near Ardley on the Red Deer River watershed. So just bringing those to your attention. And then other provincial initiatives are ongoing, including those water sharing agreements in the Bow, Red Deer, and Old Man watersheds. And the province's drought website noted a recent update that those agreements should become complete next week. So just for your awareness, but that's really the update that I have for the chair. And happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Does anyone have any questions on that update? Mayor Janung, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie, if you could, I just am curious around the joint messaging or joint conservation efforts regionally. Can you maybe expand on some of those conversations?
Yeah, we're sort of thinking about it in not necessarily a particular, trying to achieve a particular per household number, but looking at what are the stages that we go through potentially together and what does that look like. So just as an example, sort of what kind of scale or level of detail is sort of around, you know, when do we go from education to voluntary conservation versus moving again from the next step to from voluntary conservation to what a more mandatory conservation objective. So that's sort of the level that we're discussing at this point. And then in terms of regional messaging, still crafting those like wordsmithing essentially. But we'll be planning to be in alignment with the province's messaging as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. I just, if I could, follow up on the restriction side. Like all of our communities have a various variety of restrictions we put in. You know, level 1 means something in Cochrane that might mean something else in the counties or the city of Calgary, for example. Is there any discussions around aligning those so that we're all, you know, and level 2 means the same thing across the region?
At this time, the bylaws are very, well, the water bylaws are sort of the driver of that. And so to go through and sort of standardize those across the region would be a large undertaking that the administrations have expressed is not really the best bang for our buck right now because of that level of effort. We want to focus on just making sure that we're meeting the needs of the public at this time and make sure that they're aware of what conditions are. And the other piece around that is that some of those water bylaws are linked to very local conditions and water levels. And so it would be difficult to see around every corner of what potential conditions might change or how yeah, it's very difficult to sort of standardize that in a practical way at the very local location. So that's yeah, we're doing that dance right now, having those conversations.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Thank you for that, Mayor. We've got Councillor Petro from Airdrie up next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, just to Mayor Janet's point there, I mean, when we talk about the region as a whole here, our residents don't, like, there's no boundaries to education. And so, I mean, 50% of our labor force goes into Calgary every day. So if you, like, if we think that they understand what our regulations are here, we are severely mistaken, because they know what Calgary does. And so we actually just brought forward to our Community Infrastructure Standing Committee to closer align to Calgary's water, I guess, their restrictions and their levels, to make sure that we are in line, so that it's easier for our residents to understand those restrictions from moving across from one boundary to another. So maybe that's something that maybe as individual municipalities, we should start to be looking at that just from our resident perspective, and maybe not the CMR looking at that as a whole. But sorry, I digressed on that one a little bit. Moving back to the topic at hand here, I have two questions. One of them is for the CMR, and if the chair is okay, I have one that's actually just directed to the City of Calgary. So my one for the CMR is really around education strategies and communication strategies. And, you know, right now we just experienced almost a record-setting month for snow in March, and we're, you know, there could be quite a bit of rain in the spring here, though, and our residents react based on a sense of urgency. So drought, we see drought everywhere, there's no snow, our residents will react to that. But if they start to see really wet conditions, communications and education on that may not be as effective, because they're like, wait, there's water everywhere, there's rain everywhere, we're not in a drought situation. So has the CMRB also considered long-term communication strategies just about the realities of the water conditions in the region, not just specifically on the drought scenario that we were anticipating right now, but that longer-term strategy? Because I think people really still don't understand how finite of a resource it is just from a resident perspective. If you're not involved in this world, you probably don't get it. So just wondering if we've considered any long-term communication strategies on that. And would the CMRB be able to comment if if there was a potential long-term regional philosophy it could tie into a newly accepted drought risk for growth plan updates? Hope that made sense, and then I'll ask my second question after.
Thank you, Councillor Petro, for the question. So we have contemplated it in so far as the water roadmap that was approved does have the promote recommendation. And while we, to your point, that telling the broader story of where water comes from in the Calgary region is a story that I also think is really important. And that's why that, well, not because I think, but that recommendation came through from the consultant as well. And so connecting the public with that information, for sure, that's important. But we haven't anticipated acting on that in the immediate term because of the season that we're about to be in. And so that takes a lot of administration resources at this time. And so we are intending to action that at a future state. And so that's how I would answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's a great response. And I know that it's probably it's a much bigger conversation to get that level of education out there, and probably something that, again, us municipalities can be doing a good job of, but just trying to make sure that we're somewhat aligning across the region, because obviously our messaging will be slightly different than Okotoks just because of our situations. Okay, thank you for that. And then the City of Calgary question, just really that we understand the City of Calgary is working with Water Smart Solutions on an integrated water security roadmap and water reuse assessment project. So just wondering if the City of Calgary could provide some details on the project, and if current water shortage and drought response is likely to advance this project more quickly. That's it. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you. Councillor Carra, or if there's someone else from Calgary who might be able to take that, or at least maybe if you can't answer, perhaps we can take it away and see if there's a answer we can get to offline. But I'll kick it over to Councillor Carra as a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any particular answer to that. I will get you an answer to that, but you know, my answer is I hope so. I think, you know, I've been saying that one of the big silver linings, the only silver lining of a punishing drought, will be that we actually get upstream flood and drought mitigation on the bow going, and it accelerates our understanding of how finite a resource it is, and we start to get serious about a lot of the things that we've been sort of talking about and starting to do, but hopefully it accelerates that. So my answer is I hope so, but I will come back to you with a much more coherent answer as to exactly how my hope is translating into reality.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments on the drought response? Mayor Janung, you have your hand up, but I think that's from before, I assume. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so invite a motion, please, that the committee receive for information an update on CMRB drought response. Anyone wish to move such a motion? Mayor Janung, thank you. Do we have a second? I'm sure we probably do. There we go. Councillor Petro, thank you so much. Okay, all those in favor of that motion that we receive for information? And any opposed? None, carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, continuing on the Jamie Graves show, you are up next for a update on board strategic initiatives. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Chair Clark. And this agenda item is a summary that you've seen a number of times. We did clean up the projects that have been closed or completed for a long time. So you'll see it's a bit shorter, but it means that we're getting through our initiatives, which is very exciting. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions that the committee might have on that, which was circulated with the agenda.
Okay. Great. Deputy Mayor Robinson, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the update on the transit scoping. Like that one is shown as being delayed. I think basically the delay is like what we did today should have been done by March 31st, and it would have been on time.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
It's a detail-oriented crew, so we got through that. Okay, any other questions on that?
I'll just briefly say I appreciate the transparency and honesty. I mean,
oh yeah,
like,
absolutely.
There's a lot of, you know, you could have easily probably just put on track or something. Most people might not have noticed for 11 days. So good on the staff to be clear and fair.
It's a good illustration of how the team works. So yeah, appreciate that, and kudos Jamie and team for that. Okay, any other questions or comments on the strategic initiatives update? And if none, I will invite a motion that the committee receive for information an update on board initiatives. Anyone wish to move such a motion? Deputy Mayor Robinson, thank you. We have a second. Mayor Janung, thank you. Any debate or discussion? And anyone wishing to vote opposed to that? Seeing, hearing none, carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go into a closed session now, pursuant to FOIP section 21(1)(a)(I), freedom of information. We will stop the live stream and stop the recording and come back when we are done. I think everyone live stream back and running and the recording happening again. So if you can let me know when that happens, we will formally restart the public session of the meeting.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, Chair Clark, I believe we are streaming.
Okay, we're back in streaming. We are back recording the meeting in public session. I would invite a member to make a motion that the committee receive for information an update on the Infrastructure Canada Permanent Transit Fund. Anyone wish to make such a motion? Councillor Petro, Deputy Mayor Robinson, thank you. Any discussion on that? And by exception, anyone wishing to vote opposed to the motion to receive for information? Seeing, hearing none, that carries unanimously. Okay, thank you very much. Anything for a brief roundtable? Does anyone have anything they want to bring up or share with the committee before you depart for the day? And if not, our next meeting, board meeting, is a couple of weeks' time, Friday, 26th of April. We will be visiting beautiful Foothills County for that meeting. Our next Land Use and Servicing Committee meeting is Thursday, 9th of May, again, 9 a.m. And Governance Committee will meet Friday previous to that, 3rd of May, 9 a.m. also on GoToMeeting online. So that exhausts our agenda. And with that agenda being exhausted, I declare the meeting terminated. Thank you all for your kind participation and look forward to connecting with you all again very soon. Be well.